Hi, my name is Charlotte. I love colorful and sparkly makeup, and I'm currently exploring how to love and collect makeup while maintaining a healthy, responsible relationship to consumption. If that sounds like content that you're interested in, then please go ahead, like, subscribe. I'll continue making more videos like this one. So this video is going to be all about swatching out and comparing some beautiful sparkly eyeshadows. Namely, this palette, the Nearly Natural palette from Glaminatrix, is going to be the star of the show, and I'm going to do some detailed comparisons between this and what was already in my collection. This is not meant to be any kind of comprehensive guide to this palette. I don't expect that the things that have existed in my collection until now are really going to hold a candle to this. So this is not about whether or not you should buy this palette or whether you needed this palette. Of course, if this is helpful for you in comparing these eyeshadows, that's great. I know you can't get this palette anymore, but I think you can still get the singles, and I mean, they're gorgeous. They're really gorgeous. I'd like this to be the start of a little series here on my channel, so I'm gonna give a quick intro to that. If you want to skip right ahead into the swatches and playing around, I will have a timestamp down below. So as I've mentioned before on my channel, I recently finished out a 6-month no-buy from February to August of this year. And prior to 2023, my eyeshadow collection has been mainly ColourPop. And it was also mainly like pre-2021 ColourPop because I didn't really buy eyeshadow for most of 2022. And I think like that speaks to my relationship to these things just kind of changing a little bit. In 2022, I was really satisfied with the color options I had, and that was really where my focus was in makeup, was in color. And now I think I have broadened my horizons a little bit in terms of like texture and finish, and have realized the limitations that that collection probably always had, but it's also just outdated, I think, like compared to how formulas have advanced. So given that I am somebody who's interested in makeup and interested in formulations, it's just not satisfying to me anymore, most of those shadows. So now that my no-buy is over, I have, expected that my eyeshadow collection would expand a little bit, and it has. It definitely has. So I'm really excited to just really, I don't know, get into the juicy swatches and like really make the most of enjoying these new palettes that I've added to my collection, and some singles as well. So yeah, I'm like trying indie formulas for mostly the first time, definitely trying like some high-end formulas for the first time, and just also like some cult status shadows and palettes that I've heard about for a long time within the makeup world, but I had just never tried before. So what I want this series to be is when I do bring in a new palette or a new formula for the first time, to swatch it out against the makeup I already had. And I think that this will help me get to know my new makeup better, get to know my existing collection better, and just to like put new makeup within the context of the makeup I already had. Yeah, and I just think it's also fun, it's pretty, and it's good information for me about what I like and what feels special. So today I'm going to go through the Nearly Natural palette. I also got the Dirty Martini palette and the Chocolate Martini palette from Glamlight. So those will be coming up in a future video as well. I think I'll do those together. I also have the Lisa Eldridge palette in Sorcery, which I plan to do this for. And I bought the Huda Rose Quartz palette as well, which this is pretty unique within my collection currently, so I'm not going to do a dedicated video on this one, but it will appear, in future videos when I'm comparing things to it. Oh, I forgot to say I also have some Looksy shadows coming in, and just so you know, like, I know this is a lot of eyeshadow, and it is just like in general, but it has been now 2 months since my no-buy ended. I filmed the overhead swatches a while ago, back in August, so a lot closer to when my no-buy had ended. Yeah, I did get a lot of these palettes like in the week or two after my no-buy ended. I will say I went on a binge, but some of them have been more gradual as well. So the palette that I want to talk about today is this one. This is the Nearly Natural palette from Glaminatrix Cosmetics. This palette is so gorgeous. I've heard this described as a colorful palette for neutral lovers and a neutral palette for color lovers. I'm in the second category, and I totally agree. This is exactly how I like to wear neutrals, and I am having so much fun doing neutral looks with this palette. I do quickly want to acknowledge one more time, because I have talked about this before in other videos, but I pre-ordered this palette during my no-buy, and that was against the rules of my no-buy, so I did break my no-buy to buy this palette, and I wish I hadn't broken my no-buy. I love and adore this palette, but I do regret breaking my no-buy. I just want to be mindful about this mostly for myself and my own brain, because I don't want to reward myself too much for breaking the no-buy, if that makes sense. I don't want to encode that reward pathway in my, little rat brain, because I will find myself back in that same situation, and I do want to make a different decision next time. And for you, if you are currently on a no-buy, I also don't want to glorify or normalize breaking a no-buy. I'm definitely not beating myself up about this. I'm not trying to shame myself by any means, but I'm just trying to be mindful. But I think I'll stop mentioning this when I do talk about this palette, just because I don't want to be a broken record on this channel. I feel like I've talked about this enough times, but just know that I'm keeping that in mind, and I'm trying to incorporate this as a lesson to myself going forward. So these are all the shimmers swatched. I love how they create like this very muted rainbow. These are very sparkly, at least a lot sparklier than anything that I have, as we'll uncover. I find this formula to be quite thin, and it feels a little bit gritty to the touch. So far, I find that these look pretty flattering on the eyes. Like, they have like an elegant quality that, allows that twinkling shimmer to come through, that little scattered sparkle, but without looking like too much on the eyes. So the first comparisons I want to make are with the rose gold and the copper at the bottom of the palette. If you saw my recent video on building a late summer neutrals palette, you saw me reconciling with these copper shades in my collection. This is a ColourPop single called Millie. This one is from the Bare Necessities palette. This is from Main Squeeze, and then this is from It's a Mood. These are all ColourPop, by the way. You can see that these are have a pretty smooth finish. So I want to compare these actually with both of those shades in the bottom row, because, I don't know, rose gold and copper kind of get melded in my mind. This one off the bat looks like it's going to be the closest color-wise to all these guys. Yeah, damn, that's quite close. This is exciting because, part of my project is to replace some of these less impressive shimmers with more impressive shimmers. Okay, I might have totally been out of frame for that whole swatch. Sorry about that. But this is the shade Second Skin in the Nearly Natural palette. This is the shade Raw. And these are both quite sparkly, especially the shade Raw. And this one's interesting because it's such a warm base, but it has a scattered sparkle that's like silver and sometimes almost bluish. And that does translate onto the eyes. So yeah, these are definitely shinier than the ColourPop. They're definitely sparklier, although under this light, I'm not sure how much the sparkle is going to be visible to you. But yeah, this is exciting because I might be able to replace some of these shades with these two. This looks really close to the It's a Mood shade. This looks pretty close to the Main Squeeze shade. And I don't know, these coppers might be somewhere in between these two. This is the shade Tiger Lily from the Jungle Lights palette from Flower Beauty. It's definitely less sparkly than this shade Second Skin. but it's super foiled and metallic, and in terms of the dimensionality, it really compares. I expected these to be closer to each other. I'm gonna swatch raw here next to, okay, that's a lot deeper than Tiger Lily, so that's interesting. Okay, so these don't really dupe each other. This is the Desert Lights palette from Flower Beauty. I re-swatched Second Skin and Raw, and now this is the shade Horizon. That is a pretty close color dupe for Raw, and I love that color. I mean, I love this shade Horizon. Horizon is also one of the smoother shades in this line, so it doesn't have those silver and blue sparkles, but that's interesting just to compare. And I should say too that I do really like the formula of these. I'm not looking to replace them in my collection, but because they're cream shadows, I don't want to depot them from this airtight container. And they also like don't layer the best. So I think of these as separate from the rest of my collection, and it would be useful for me to have like pretty close color dupes of these in formulas that I can like combine with other shadows, and in pans that I can like put into custom palettes. So that's part of why I'm comparing these guys. I wanted to briefly compare Raw to this shade. It's an unnamed shade from a Rude Cosmetics like Enchanted Pixies palette. This is basically a satin like pearl finish. It's very not very shiny at all, but I just love this color so much, and I would love to find a shade dupe for this in a prettier formula. At first I thought that this Odin's Eye shade, I think it's Ivy. At first I thought that this might be a color dupe for that, but the shimmer, the bases are similar. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, see the bases are pretty similar, but the shimmer on this is just much too bright a pink. So, yeah, anyway, I was kind of hoping that Raw might compare to this, but this is much more red, this is much more brown. This shade is Fizz from the Beauty Bay Earthy palette, and I've compared it here to Second Skin again. It's less sparkly. This shade is interesting because I really like it in theory. Like, it swatches really beautifully, and it's obviously like a hugely metallic and impactful shade. But I do find that, you know, when I'm reaching for a brown shimmer, I'm usually, you know, maybe I'm going to the office, or I'm meeting somebody for coffee, or I'm meeting a new person for the first time. Like, these are occasions when I need something maybe a little bit more subdued. I find that this on the eyes, it looks so metallic and so foiled that I just find that in those circumstances it's too much. And yet when I have the option of wearing whatever makeup I want and I can wear something super intense, like, I'm not gonna wear a brown shimmer. So I don't know that a really intense neutral like this really serves a purpose for me. And I think it's interesting to reconcile that as I think about like decluttering some of my old shadows at the end of the year, because there is a place for smoother finish, less impressive neutrals, because when I'm going for a neutral look, you know, those give me the subtlety that I need in those circumstances. These shades are definitely more impactful. Like, they're not subtle necessarily, but they do offer like an elevated elegance that I think makes them work in those contexts. This is the shade Stripped Back. I hope it's not getting totally washed out under these lights, but it's a cool toned kind of lavendery gray shade, a little bit taupey. I really love this shade. I don't have really anything else in my collection like this. I think the closest thing would be this shade in the Jungle Lights palette, but I think it's gonna be a little bit, yeah, it's quite a bit warmer. Oh, I love this shade Wild so much, and this is one of the sparklier formulas in these palettes. Yeah, the deep base on that is incredible. I kind of wish this had a deeper base because it really doesn't, and that's part of what makes it not as great as a lid shade. But yeah, there's definitely a place for both of these in my collection. They're both super pretty. There's definitely a lot of shimmer particles left over on my skin here, but that is to be expected. This is the shade Exposed. I really like this shade, and I was surprised at how much I like this shade. I really love green eyeshadow, but I tend to like a greener, bluer, more true green shade. And I find that so many of the greens that you find on the market are super gold. Like the Natasha Denona Yucca palette, it really didn't tempt me at all because it was full of greens that are really golds, I think. For some reason, it doesn't bother me in this palette because I think this green is not trying very hard to be a green, and so somehow I can just sort of take it more for what it is. And also when you pair it with this grungy matte, it sort of enhances the green in this shadow. The closest thing I have in my collection is this shade Rosé. I think it's called Rosé All Day. This is a ColourPop single. I have a weird relationship with this shadow. I got this in the midst of my like search for my perfect green eyeshadow, which for some reason was so hard to find and like took me years. But I don't know, this shadow was just so disappointing, and I tried for so long to make myself like it, but it's just so gold. It's like not green at all. I mean, it's just a disappointing green. I feel like this is something unto itself, but this is just a disappointing green. I don't know. I'm definitely gonna declutter this shadow just because like it makes me angry for some reason. I just really don't like it. This next shade, New Nude, is definitely just a light gold that is trying only to be a gold. It's also one of the smoother formulas in this palette. In fact, I think it's along with Stripped Back, but I think it might be more smooth than Stripped Back. It's more of a traditional metallic. I have a few light golds to compare this to. This is from Jungle Lights again. This shade is so intense. But it's a really nice inner corner shade. That's really the only way I've ever used this. They're very comparable tones. This one is a bit more reflective. This one's just a little bit more subdued. Similarly, I have this shade Kava from the Beauty Bay Earthy palette. This is also a really intense metallic. Oh wow, like, oh fucking, look at that. It's so metallic. Like it looks like, you know, liquid metal. It's beautiful, and it does have some sparkle particles in it as well. Again, like the Glaminatrix version is just more subdued. And then this is a ColourPop shade called Love Song. And again, like I was saying about the neutrals, I actually find this really useful as an inner corner shade for neutral looks because it's really subdued. Like it's not swatching very well at all. I mean, it does not compare to these guys, but sometimes that's what you want in a neutral look. Although I will say that New Nude gives it a run for its money because they're kind of doing similar things. I don't know, it's interesting to think about the pros and cons of different kinds of formulas actually in practice. Okay, this is the shade Nearly Natural. It's the title shade of the palette, and it's so special. This is actually pretty much the shade I bought the palette for, and it doesn't disappoint. It's a really, really nice, like warm, rosy color. It's got a pretty decently deep base, beautiful sparkle. Like this is so sparkly on the eye, but still elegant and not crepey, at least in my experience so far. And it has like those same silvery kind of shimmer particles in it. Really, really beautiful. And I don't really have anything like this in my collection, which again is like why I was on the hunt for a shade like this. I will have more to compare this to in the Glamlight comparison video when I do that, but for the purposes of this video, those palettes don't exist in my collection yet. So I'm going to go ahead and compare it to this shade Red Rocks, which is one of my favorite shades in these Flower Beauty palettes. It's quite a bit deeper, but definitely like similar vibes. I'm just gonna also quickly go back into Horizon and see how it compares to this. Okay, much, much more brown. It's definitely a closer shade match to Raw over here. The next shade we're gonna compare is called Unveiled. I don't know how well the tone of these will match, but I've swatched out 3 ColourPop shades. This is from the Strawberry Shake palette. This is from It's a Mood. This is from the Zodiac palette. You can see all 3 are very, very smooth. This is a really smooth but super shiny. I don't think this is doing it justice, but on the inner corner it's super shiny. This is from Desert Lights. Really nice shade. Now I'm gonna swatch Unveiled. And this is another of the sparkly shades. Okay, it's peachier than most of these pinks. And again, this has like, it's got something blue in the sparkle and something silvery. I wonder if it's the same sparkle on all of these. That is a gorgeous, gorgeous shade. Gorgeous. So gorgeous. And obviously it's just way better. It's way better than the things that I had in my collection before, at least these guys. Okay, this final top shade is called Naked Eye. This is another really special shade in this palette, and I've already used this so many times as an inner corner highlight. It's a really lovely, really sparkly champagne shade. Look at that. So lovely. And this is nice tapped out all over the lid too, just for like a wet look. Okay, this is the shade Silk Teddy from the Bare Necessities palette. It's a nice shade, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot smoother. I don't know if you'll be able to tell on camera because the shimmer particles are kind of like everywhere at this point, and also these shades are obviously both really close to my skin tone. But yeah, I'd say Naked Eye is just a million times more special, although the shades are pretty close. Okay, I also wanted to compare this. This is partly just for my own interest, but I did also get this Moon Dust Shadow in the shade Space Cowboy, another iconic makeup item that I had heard about for years and just never tried. Like, it literally for years, it just didn't occur to me to venture past outside of the realm of ColourPop and like past that price range at all. Like, this is a lot to spend for a single eyeshadow, but I don't know. At this point in my makeup journey, I think I'm like okay with sometimes getting the real thing instead of the dupe. So I want to swatch this out and see how it compares with Naked Eye because it's possible that they're dupes, in which case I would feel a little dumb for getting this one. I mean, come on, like I wanted to try it, let's be real. They're really close. So I think Space Cowboy is like a little bit more twinkly, whereas Naked Eye is like has like a more of a sheen to it in addition to the sparkle. So I think that would be the main difference. This really does give that the wet look that everybody talks about, but these are pretty close. And again, the shimmer particles are everywhere, so this isn't like going to be the cleanest comparison between these two shadows. But this makes me feel like I'm glad to have Space Cowboy in addition to this one. So that does it for my comparisons with the Nearly Natural palette. Thank you so much if you made it this far. Thank you for watching. I think that swatching these out, it made me think about how, you know, in the anti-consumerist beauty space, it's really common to hear people say, you know, you don't need this thing because you have the same thing at home. You don't need this thing because you have a better thing at home. And you'll see people trying to resist the temptation to buy something, and they'll be like duping out the palette with like Pat McGrath special shades, you know, like really beautiful stuff that are sometimes objectively better than the thing that they're duping out. And I think it's important to recognize that we continue to feel this desire even when we have a beautiful, comprehensive collection of special makeup. Because we're just like brains, you know, and advertising and marketing is the science of like manipulating our brains. So like, of course it succeeds. But that's a different tangent. And I think it's important for me to keep in mind as I'm swatching out these beautiful, beautiful shades that are so special to me now, that next time I'm on a no buy, I might forget that they're special, and I might forget that they're like better than the thing I want or just as good as the thing I want. And so I think that's important for me to keep in my head now as my collection is just sort of like improving, like objectively, like in terms of formulation, you know, it's just objectively improving as it expands. And that's important to me to bring in only things that feel special to me, etc., etc. However, I also want to say that during my 6-month no buy, the things I wanted and the things I was realizing were worth my attention were, you know, special indie eyeshadows, like some of this stuff that I'm showing you now. Objectively, I did not have better at home, and I did not have the same thing at home. So that reasoning didn't work for me, and that made it perhaps more of a challenge. I think that was also really good to have that challenge and to be on a no buy at the time when I was realizing that there were so many things that were better, because it kept me in check for sure. But what I would offer to you, if you are going on a no buy or trying to keep your consumption in check and you're perhaps in a similar position to where I was, like it could be that those things don't apply to you and that it becomes more of a challenge because of that. But you just have to have other reasons not to buy the thing. And sometimes that reason is just that you promised yourself you wouldn't buy it. And that's enough. Like that is good enough. It's not about there's a cheaper dupe. It's not about you have better at home. You just promised yourself you wouldn't buy it, and that's kind of the end of it. It could also be that you can't afford that thing, which, you know, unfortunately is also the end of it. So while those things are usually helpful things to hear, they're also not the only reasons. That's probably obvious, but I think like when you're in the midst of all these thoughts, like your brain can just play all sorts of tricks. So those are sort of my thoughts coming out of a no buy, wanting all these things that I knew were going to be a good value to me. I knew that, you know, they were better than the things I had, but I still had to find a reason every time to not buy the thing. And for me, that reason was just that I was on a no buy, you know. And I think that's like honestly the benefit of a no buy, because it makes that conversation with yourself a lot easier in my experience. Anyway, I'm rambling and I'm not even here to give advice. Like this channel is not about advice, similar to what I was saying about the swatches. It's not a guide, it's not a comprehensive, like informative video at all. This is just, you know, my own diary of my own experience through these things. So I hope that you found this interesting, inspiring. At the end of the day, it's just fun to look at pretty things. Stay tuned for the rest of this series. I find it interesting to see the differences. You know, like when a new palette comes out, a lot of people will do comparison swatches with things that are just as beautiful, and that's helpful and informative, but I do kind of find it kind of satisfying to like look at how much better the Glaminatrix shades are compared to the older formulas. I don't know, I find that interesting and fun and satisfying, especially for me because, you know, I have this palette now. As I move forward with this series, you know, next time I do a video on these, I'm going to be comparing shadows to Nearly Natural and you know, so on and so forth. So my comparisons are going to expand and they're going to get better, and the differences between the shadows I bring in and the shadows I had are probably going to become less stark. So I'm interested to see how this develops, and at a certain point it might be, you know, it might stop being interesting for me to do these. But for now, whenever I do get something that I think would be interesting to compare to the rest, I will definitely sit down and do some detailed swatches and share them with you guys. So thank you again so much for joining me during this time, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!